Hi there folks, Martin Lehner here again from Orange Technology. And in today's video, I actually want to talk about something a little bit different. IT related again, as opposed to sort of the philosophy, life stuff we've been talking about. What I want to talk about is the importance of passwords, essentially. For those of you in the IT industry, for those of you managing clients, network servers, et cetera, you obviously have clients, users, and they use passwords to log into their computers. Pretty straightforward. Unless, there may be some of you who already have smart chips, smart cards that have the integrated circuit chip in them. That are using that to log into their computers. And if you have that, that's great. I mean, wow, smart cards, awesome. But let's be honest, most of us, especially if our clients or if our business or where we work is smaller, not as large, then you are likely going to just have passwords. So, we can set rules on password complexity. So this is common, in all the new versions of server. It's right there when you set up users is your password complexity requirements. So, I mean, you can say you need a 9-character password, and you have to have an uppercase letter, and you have to have a number, and you must have a special symbol, and all this fun stuff. Now, the trouble with that is if you make the rules too complex, if you make the password too long and complicated, then people in general won't remember what it is. And then what do? They write it down on a sticky note, on a Post-it, and they put it on their monitor. Now, as we know, that's probably the most insecure password. Password 1234 is more secure than that, because that is just written on someone's monitor, and anybody walking by can grab that. They can sit down, use the computer right away. They can keep track of that up here, et cetera, et cetera. It's just not a good practice. So the question is, how do you get around that? And, there's a lot of philosophy and thought on this. Educate your users, tell them why it's important. This is all true. However, there are some things you have to consider. For example, what if you have an employee or there's a user and they simply can't remember a 9-character password that has all these special symbol requirements and uppercase and a number and all this stuff? What if they just can't? What if someone has, well, actually we'll talk about this a little bit later on, but let's just say somebody can't remember that, or they just can't grasp it. It gets even worse when you put an expiry on that password. So for example, every 60 days or 30 days, you have to change that password. And then now all of a sudden, it's a different password, and you can't use any of the passwords you used in the last 6 times. So it's one of those things where, if somebody finally does remember it, now they've got to change it, and we start all over again. I've even seen now in password complexity where, a certain number of characters within the password have to be unique. So you can't just add a number at the end and now that's the new password. Now you actually have to change the letters or how the letters are structured within the word. A lot of times now, and you can Google this or look it up on YouTube, we have something called Passphrase. So this is something like where your password is actually a phrase like, I really like sunny weather, where every word within that phrase has a capital letter, but it's all one word, there's no spaces. So it's, I like sunny days, or I like sunny weather, and I is capital, and then the L for like is capital, and then the S for sunny is capital, and so forth and so forth. And then you throw a number on the end, or an exclamation mark at the end because it's a phrase and you're really happy about it, or whatever, right? The problem with these things is they get really complex and they're hard to remember. And really, you're going to be going back and forth with password resets all the time. So, there's another factor to this, before we talk about some of the solutions, and one that I've actually found, which has worked, has its downsides, but does work, is I'm not sure how it is in Canada or in the US or elsewhere in the world, but here in Canada, you know, human rights acts basically um, dictate or have a framework that you must do anything reasonable to accommodate an employee with a disability. So, for example, if someone's in a wheelchair, if someone is a wheelchair and you have stairs in your office and your office is not accessible, you have a duty to make it accessible for that person. If you have bathrooms in your office and they are not accessible bathrooms, but you have an employee who needs that accessibility, it's your responsibility to make that happen, essentially. And you know what? There's upsides and downsides to this. You know, I understand legislation. I understand why it exists. In a lot of cases, a lot of these things are structural. So basically, it means, you know, you have to have a wheelchair accessible office. Well, most offices are wheelchair accessible because the legislation requiring, or the building regulations, I should say, requiring accessibility have been out for a long time, right? So same with accessible bathrooms. Generally, you don't have a bathroom where there's stairs to get into the bathroom. Usually it's on the same level. So if you're in a wheelchair, you can just roll in and that's it. And honestly, I have no problems with these. I think they're good regulations to have. They are good requirements to have. You know, I don't have a physical disability like that. I'm not in a wheelchair or something like that. I can't imagine what it would be like to be in that kind of a position. I couldn't imagine that it makes life easier. That's just my perception. I wouldn't assume that it makes life easier for anybody. So, you know, again, small things like that, you know, accessible workplaces, things like that, I have no problem with that at all. But that being said, you know, the duty to accommodate doesn't just mean a physical disability. So this could also mean an intellectual one or something like that. What if somebody can, you know, you have a job for, you know, accounts payable processing, okay? Or sorry, let's say accounts receivable processing. Accounts receivable is usually a fairly standardized system in a lot of businesses. So let's say you have a position in accounts receivable. You look every day, you see the people who've paid their bills, et cetera, and you post that into the general ledger or into the accounting system or whatever the process is. So you have somebody who has a disability, an intellectual one or whatever, who does this posting, and really, I mean, AR posting, especially for larger or organizations, is a pretty it's a pretty structured task. There's a certain way to do it, so there are steps that you follow, and it's very repetitive. You just keep doing those steps each time for every payment you receive, for every account, right? It's fairly straightforward. So you've got somebody doing that, and what if this person, they have a disability and they can't remember, they physically cannot remember, you know, 20 character passphrase or 15 character or whatever your company or group has mandated as their security requirements. Okay, you know, this is one of those things where a workplace accommodation is reasonably feasible and reasonably expected. So one of those questions, how do you do that, right? You don't want to change the rules for everybody else because of this one specific user who needs this accommodation, but, right, how do you apply different rules to them? So I would argue one of the options, and I'll show you guys here on the computer. I'll have to move my my camera a little bit. Give me a sec here. So one of the options I would argue that would be useful would be giving the employee a pass card, right? So this is a magnetic card, right? It's a magnetic card that you can encode. I have a reader, I have a writer, so I can write this magnetic stripe here has what's called tracks on it. So there's 3 tracks on this particular card. So I can input data for each of the tracks. So I can input data for one track or more if I want. Okay. Here I have a barcode reader. This is just a USB barcode reader. It cost me $25 Canadian. That's about 20 bucks US. Pretty cheap, right? And so here I've got my login, right? So Give me a second. I'm just going to put this back on the mount, and then I'm just going to adjust this over so you guys can see the computer. So there's the computer. There we go. So again, I've got the barcode reader. So here I am, here at the login window. Here I am. I can key the password in that I've got, you know, as normal. So I'll key the password in quickly. There we go. So I've got that, right? I'm gonna lock it. We are back at the sign-in window. Now, so instead of keying it in with the keyboard, all I have to do is swipe, and there you go. It unlocks for me, right? Again, we'll do it again. So here we are. Get to the password window where you input your password, swipe, and you are in. Now that seems, I mean, that's pretty straightforward, right? There's nothing special about that. Basically, I just swipe this in here and it plugs it in. Now, of course, there's downsides to this. This is very straightforward. This is an unencrypted card, right? So basically, when you plug in one of these USB magnetic card readers, it basically just becomes like a keyboard input. So what happens is when you swipe your card, like if you were to do it in Notepad, it would just be like a copy paste, right? So you basically, when you swipe, the device reads what's on the card, it copies it, and it pastes it to the screen just as text, right? So, I mean, it's a little bit, if you were to steal one of these cards and you had a card reader, you could just swipe it, and in Notepad, you would get what the password is, right? And in this case, it's just a bunch of numbers that I'm using for demonstration purposes, but that's essentially what it is. Now again, I mean, you know, you can look at encrypting these, you know, if you need encrypted and that kind of thing. But this is a very simple solution to the particular problem. You know, for example, if this user just leaves this at their desk, it's really not that much better than having a Post-it note stuck to your monitor. But this in and of itself is not really readable, right? You would have to have a USB card reader, which, let's be honest, most people don't have. But I mean, you can go and buy one, they're fairly cheap. Then you would have to take the card, you would have to swipe it, and you would have to read in Notepad or whatever, you know, what's presented. I would argue that is multitudes more secure than having a Post-it note on your monitor. I'm not saying it's secure. This is not secure. This password just lives on this card, right? If you lose this card in the grocery store, somebody could swipe it and they will get some passwords. You know, again, depending on what you put on the front, because these are printable, they may not know what that password's for. They may have no idea. So effectively, I mean, you have security through obscurity, because if you just lose this card, what is this? Is this a Safeway card? Is this a you know, a pass card for a computer system? You know, is this an Air Miles card? We have no idea, right? So I mean, you swipe it, you get some random letters and numbers and symbols, and really, who knows, right? Could be anything. So, you know, in terms of that, in terms of in your office, if a coworker were to take it, obviously they would know what it's for and they probably know who it's for. But again, is it more secure than having a Post-it on your monitor? I would argue absolutely yes. Again, not arguing it is an excellent solution, not arguing that it's what you should be doing or the only solution you should be looking at, but it is multitudes more secure than just having a Post-it note. So these are kind of the things you have to think of. Sometimes you have to get creative and you have to think about what solutions make sense for the problem you have. And just because a solution is imperfect, or you know that there's problems with it, or you know that you know, again, swiping that card is going to show up in Notepad, that doesn't make it a bad solution. It means there's better solutions out there, and it means it's not perfect, and you need to understand its limitations, and you need to mitigate you know, the negative outcomes or possibilities with that. but you also need to look at what it's replacing. And I would argue if the swipe card is replacing a post-it on a monitor, I would argue that that is multitudes more secure than the post-it. You have gone up a level in your overall security. It's still not great. Again, unencrypted card, notepad, I get it, but you are better off than where you were. And again, for specific use cases, again, for example, for someone with a disability where you have to make that accommodation, something like this doesn't cost you much. I mean, really, you don't have to buy a card writer. I mean, you can go find a company that has that and is able to encode, right? And they'll charge you, I don't know, $10 a card, $20 a card. It's really not that much. You buy 5 or 6 cards, so you have a couple spares. You buy the $25 card reader, and away you go. Really doesn't cost that much. That person can still have the passphrase. They have it on a card, and you're pretty much done. Once in a while, you'll probably need to go get them re-encoded with a new passphrase when that cycles, and et cetera, et cetera. But really, in the grand scheme of things, it's not really a lot of money. I mean, even if it's $20 a month for a new card, that's not that is completely insignificant in the grand scheme of things. So those are things that you should be thinking about, is where can you improve security? Maybe for your offsite access, maybe your offsite access right now is you don't have anything. I mean, you don't have a real firewall. You just have, everybody can log in. It's open to the complete internet, and anybody can RDP in if they want into any machine. That's not really a great solution, right? That's not really all that good. So, you as the IT administrator or whatever, you're looking at it and you're going, okay, I want a firewall. I want, SSL VPN at 256K or 512K or whatever. And I want, on top of that, I want dual factor authentication. I want MAC address authentication and all this other stuff, right? That's great. I'm not saying you shouldn't go for that. The more levels and layers of security you build, inherently the more secure your network will be. That's just a fact. That being said, if right now you're completely open to the world, all somebody needs is, username and password to authenticate with Windows, and you can RDP in from anywhere on the web, that's basically as low as it gets. There are ways to go a little bit lower, but you would really have to try to go lower at that point. But that is pretty much as low as it gets. Based on that, if you have the opportunity to go to, an SSL VPN that only has static username and password authentication, do you sit there and you go, oh no, I don't want that. There's no two-factor. The authentication bits are it's not 512 bit. It's it's only 128. It's using SHA-1. It's old standard or whatever. I would argue that you're not being very responsible if you're not considering that as a stepping stone, as a growth opportunity. If you're willing to leave basically RDP open to the web, instead of going with, a very basic SSL VPN that's just username and password authentication, no two-factor, I would argue that you're doing a disservice to the company you work for or to your client or whomever this is, because even though this basic VPN without dual factor authentication and all this other stuff isn't where you want to be, I would argue it's still multitudes better than where you are right now. And if it's multitudes better than where you are right now, then why not go there and still work towards that that large goal, right, of dual factor authentication and all that stuff. Why don't you work towards that? But in the meantime, while you're not there, why don't you go to that next level, which will be more secure? There's no doubt that that is more secure. But just because it's not where you want and what you want to have, doesn't mean you shouldn't not do it, right? Or you shouldn't do it. And that's what you should really think about. Again, this is a very simple example of a solution, of an imperfect solution that is not 100% perfect by any means. But again, if this replaces a post-it on somebody's monitor, I would argue that's an improvement, a significant improvement. So yeah, that's one of the things you should think about. And yeah, that's the end of today's video. So hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time.